There is a notebook, not a medical file, not an official royal document, not a record from any palace archive. A small, private notebook written in a doctor's own hand. Inside it, the physician describes injecting 3/4 of a grain of morphine and 1 grain of cocaine into the distended jugular vein of the King of England. He records the time. He notes that his wife was telephoned and asked to call the Times of London, so the death announcement would appear in the respectable morning edition rather than, in his own words, the less appropriate evening journals. The king died at 11:55 p.m. That notebook survived for 50 years before anyone read it. The man who wrote those words was Bertrand Dawson, 1st Viscount Dawson of Penn. He had been a physician to the royal family since 1907. Nearly 3 decades of private access to the sovereign's body, bedroom, medical decisions, and trust. By the night of January 20th, 1936, Dawson held a kind of authority that no law had granted and no protocol governed. The British monarchy had spent centuries building systems to control succession, ceremony, marriage, public image, and political survival. It had never built a system to oversee what happened when a royal physician closed the bedroom door. There was no committee. No second opinion was required. No witness was obligated to be present. The same institution that managed every photograph, every balcony appearance, every newspaper headline about the crown, left the king's final hours entirely in the hands of one man whose motives would not be examined for half a century. But to understand how a doctor could kill a king, write it down, and face no consequence, not during his lifetime, not after his death, not even after the notebook was finally published in 1986, you need to understand who George V was. And the first thing to understand is that he was never supposed to wear the crown at all. George Frederick Ernest Albert was born on June 3rd, 1865, the second son of the Prince of Wales, who would later become King Edward VII. In the line of succession, George was the spare. The heir was his elder brother, Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, known within the family as Eddie. Eddie was the one groomed for kingship. Eddie was the one whose marriage was carefully arranged to secure the next generation. In late 1891, Eddie became engaged to Princess Victoria Mary of Teck, called May by the family, a bride selected for her royal lineage, her practical temperament, and her suitability for the demands of a future queen consort. The engagement was announced. The wedding preparations began. George, meanwhile, was a serving naval officer. He loved ships, he loved the sea, and he had no expectation of ruling anything larger than a warship's deck. Then, in January 1892, Eddie caught pneumonia during an influenza pandemic sweeping through England. 6 days after his 28th birthday. The funeral was held at Windsor. The succession shifted overnight. George was now the direct heir to the British throne. And, within 18 months, he was engaged to May of Teck, his dead brother's fiancée, redirected from one prince to the next as efficiently as a piece of diplomatic correspondence. They married at the Chapel Royal, St James's Palace, on July 6, 1893. The dynasty required a bride. The bride was available. The contract was fulfilled. The marriage, by most accounts, proved to be a strong and lasting partnership, but its origin was pure institutional reflex. A grieving family had lost its heir and solved the problem by reassigning the woman already selected for the role. George exchanged the navy for the suffocating machinery of royal preparation. He learned statecraft, the way his brother had been learning it. Through audiences, briefings, tours, and the daily ceremonial rituals that transformed a private person into a public instrument. When his father, Edward VII, died on May 6, 1910, George became King George V at the age of 44. He inherited an empire that stretched across a quarter of the world's landmass, a constitutional system that required him to reign without ruling, a court that ran on protocol so rigid that even mealtimes were choreographed, and a family that was about to be tested by the most violent decade in modern European history. George's personality was not complex, but it was precisely suited to survival. He was conservative, suspicious of change, emotionally rigid, physically tough, devoted to routine, and deeply committed to duty above personal desire. He collected stamps with an obsessive meticulousness that produced one of the finest philatelic collections in the world. He shot game at Sandringham, his beloved estate in Norfolk, with the disciplined regularity of a man who treated leisure as another form of obligation. He set every clock at Sandringham 30 minutes ahead of Greenwich Mean Time, a tradition called Sandringham time, to squeeze more daylight from the shooting day. It was a small, almost comic eccentricity that revealed something essential about the king. He needed to control time itself inside his own house. He was not brilliant. He was not charismatic. He was reliable. And in the years ahead, reliability would prove more valuable than genius, because the world that had produced the British monarchy was about to tear itself apart. He was also a harsh father. George and Queen Mary had 6 children: Edward, Albert, Mary, Henry, George, and John. The household at Sandringham and Buckingham Palace ran on strict schedules, formal appearances, and emotional distance enforced by court convention. The children were raised by nannies, tutors, and governesses. They saw their parents at appointed times. They learned to stand, bow, curtsy, and speak in public long before they understood the political machinery surrounding them. The Duke of Windsor later wrote about his father's intimidating manner. The sharp rebukes, the rigid expectations, the impossibility of casual affection inside a system built to display unity rather than feel it. Queen Mary matched her husband in reserve. She was formidable, devoted to the institution above all else, and nearly incapable of displaying emotion publicly. The woman who had been reassigned from one prince to another had become one of the most disciplined consorts in British history, managing the royal household with precision, collecting antiques with expertise, and embodying the monarchy's image of unshakable permanence. Then there was Prince John. The youngest child suffered from epilepsy, and from around 1916, he was raised separately at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate. Removed from official royal life, cared for by his nanny Charlotte Bill, visited occasionally by his mother, but kept away from public appearances, state photographs, and the carefully controlled image of the royal family. He died in 1919, aged 13, after a severe seizure. His funeral was private. His life was not hidden through active cruelty. There was genuine care and affection from some family members, but his separation from the public-facing monarchy was deliberate. The institution managed what people saw. It always had. A child with epilepsy did not fit the portrait of permanence the crown needed to project. The family addressed the inconvenience quietly, with a separate house, a dedicated nurse, and a controlled absence from official records. It was the same instinct that would later govern the king's death. Manage the image, manage the timing, manage what the public is allowed to know. The First World War arrived in 1914, and it shattered the network of royal cousins who occupied nearly every major throne in Europe. George V, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia were all closely related, George and Nicholas were first cousins through their mothers. Both were grandsons of Christian IX of Denmark. And the physical resemblance between them was so striking that they were sometimes mistaken for each other in photographs. Wilhelm was a grandson of Queen Victoria. 3 monarchs, 3 empires, 1 war that would destroy 2 of those thrones and force the third to reinvent itself entirely. The first crisis was domestic and existential. Anti-German feeling in Britain was ferocious. Shops with German-sounding names were attacked. German-born residents were interned. And the royal family's surname, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, inherited from Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's German consort, became politically toxic. The King of England carried a German name, while British soldiers died fighting Germany. George V responded with an act of dynastic surgery. On July 17, 1917, he issued a royal proclamation officially changing the family's name to Windsor, a name drawn from the castle, from English geography, from anything that did not sound like the enemy. Centuries of Hanoverian and Coburg lineage were erased in a single document. Kaiser Wilhelm reportedly joked that he looked forward to attending a performance of The Merry Wives of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. The attribution is uncertain, but the irony it expressed was exact. The King of England had renamed his family to hide what it actually was. The calculation worked. The House of Windsor survived the war. The House of Hohenzollern did not. Neither did the House of Romanov. And the Romanovs are where this story acquires its deepest moral wound. After the Russian Revolution of February 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated. The provisional government held the imperial family under house arrest. The British government considered offering asylum. According to private correspondence and later historical analysis, George V appeared at first to agree to the proposal. His cousin, his near twin, the man whose face mirrored his own, was in danger. Then he withdrew. The reasons remain disputed. Some historians argue the government advised against it, fearing that harbouring the Tsar would fuel revolutionary sentiment among British workers. Others argue the king himself grew alarmed at the political risk and privately communicated his objections through his private secretary. The responsibility was shared between palace and government, but the outcome was singular. The asylum offer was never extended. Nicholas, Alexandra and their 5 children remained in Russia. On July 17, 1918, exactly 1 year to the day after the Windsor name change, the Romanov family was executed in Yekaterinburg. The cousin who looked like George was killed in a basement while George slept safely in a palace whose name he had just changed. The British monarchy survived. It survived because it chose survival over family. 4 empires collapsed during or shortly after the war: German, Russian, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman. Thrones that had been occupied by relatives, allies and fellow monarchs vanished. George V's endured because he grasped, or was made to grasp, that the monarchy's survival now depended entirely on controlled public image. The crown had to appear British, stable, sympathetic, and ordinary enough to avoid revolutionary anger while remaining extraordinary enough to justify its existence. This double performance, closeness and distance, normalcy and majesty, became the defining project of George V's reign. He executed it with the rigid discipline of a naval officer following standing orders. The post-war years tested that discipline repeatedly. The Irish War of Independence, the partition of Ireland, and the creation of the Irish Free State in 1922 reduced the territorial scope of the Crown. The General Strike of 1926 exposed class tensions that made the monarchy's ceremonial wealth politically uncomfortable. The Great Depression strained public patience with institutions that looked expensive and remote. Through all of it, George V maintained the rituals, the court, the Christmas gatherings at Sandringham, the trooping the colour, the state opening of Parliament, while quietly adapting the monarchy's public posture towards something more accessible. His most powerful tool was one no previous monarch had possessed: the radio. In 1932, George V delivered the first ever royal Christmas broadcast, speaking from a small room at Sandringham into a microphone that carried his voice across the British Empire. The words were written by Rudyard Kipling. The voice was the king's own, gruff, formal, distinctly personal, unmistakably real. For the first time in history, a British sovereign entered the homes of ordinary subjects as a speaking presence. The broadcasts were enormously popular, and they did something no portrait, ceremony, or procession could. They made the king sound human. The monarchy had always managed its image through architecture, ceremony, clothing, and newspapers. Now it could manage its voice. George V became the first king whose subjects felt they knew what he sounded like. The institution had found a new instrument of survival. In May 1935, George V celebrated his Silver Jubilee, 25 years on the throne. The celebrations in London were enormous. Crowds filled the streets, bunting hung from buildings. The King and Queen appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, waving to a public whose affection was, by all accounts, genuine and overwhelming. George was reportedly surprised. One account attributes to him the remark, "I am beginning to think they must really like me for myself," though the exact wording varies across sources. The sentiment, however, was real. After a quarter century of world war, imperial contraction, economic collapse, and the disappearance of nearly every related European monarchy, the British crown was not merely surviving. It was loved. The balcony, the crowds, the Silver Jubilee, this was the peak. 8 months later, the man those crowds adored would be dead, his final hours shortened by the physician standing at the foot of the bed. The decline began quietly. By late 1935, George V's chronic bronchial problems, a legacy of the severe illness that had nearly killed him in 1928, worsened again. That earlier illness matters because it established the medical dependency that made everything else possible. In November 1928, the king developed streptococcal pneumonia complicated by septicemia, a blood poisoning that spread rapidly and brought him close to death. The recovery was agonizing and incomplete. He was left with permanent respiratory weakness, reduced stamina, and a body that never fully returned to its former resilience. The crisis also deepened Lord Dawson's authority. Dawson had served the royal household for more than 20 years by the time of the pneumonia. But the 1928 illness transformed him from trusted doctor to medical gatekeeper. He was the man who understood the king's condition more intimately than anyone, who had access to the king's private rooms without question, who held the confidence of a sovereign whose entire public identity depended on appearing strong. Dawson saved the king's life in 1928. The gratitude that followed gave him unchecked authority over the body he had preserved. By January 1936, that body was failing. George V travelled to Sandringham for Christmas, as always, because that was what the family did. The routine was sacred, even when the man at its centre was dying. His heart weakened. His breathing grew laboured. Members of the Privy Council travelled from London to Sandringham to conduct essential state business at the king's bedside, because the constitutional machinery of the nation could not pause while the sovereign declined. The family assembled. Edward, Prince of Wales, was summoned. Queen Mary remained close. Archbishop Cosmo Gordon Lang, the Archbishop of Canterbury, arrived to administer the last rites. Sandringham, the private country house the king loved, not Buckingham Palace, not Windsor Castle, not any state building, became the stage for the final act. Dawson took charge of that stage with the calm authority of nearly 3 decades of service. No one questioned his decisions. No one requested an outside physician. No one established guidelines for what could or could not be done inside that bedroom. The monarchy's innermost circle operated, as it always had, on personal relationships, rather than institutional oversight. The same system that gave the crown its privacy gave one man the power to determine when the king's life would end. On the evening of January 20th, 1936, Dawson drafted a medical bulletin. The words he chose would become the most famous sentence in British medical history. The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close. The bulletin was issued to the press at approximately 9:25 p.m. It was elegant, dignified, and humane. The perfect public epitaph for a monarch who had spent his reign managing appearances. It was also, in the most precise sense, premature. The king was dying, but the death had not yet happened. The bulletin did not describe a medical observation. It described an intention. Roughly 90 minutes separated the bulletin from the act. During that window, Dawson arranged a telephone call. His wife, Lady Dawson, was contacted at their London home and asked to telephone the offices of The Times. The message was specific. Hold the morning edition. The king's death would be announced in time for the first printing. Dawson had decided that the news of the sovereign's passing should appear in the respectable morning broadsheet, not in the evening tabloids that he considered beneath the dignity of the event. A king's death, in Dawson's calculation, was a matter of editorial scheduling. At approximately 11 o'clock that night, Dawson administered the injections: 3/4 of a grain of morphine, 1 grain of cocaine, both delivered directly into the distended jugular vein of the king. Not a pill. Not a measured intravenous drip through the arm. A needle pushed into the neck of a dying monarch by the doctor who had spent 3 decades earning the right to stand beside that bed. George V died at 11:55 p.m. on January 20th, 1936. He was 70 years old. He had reigned for 25 years and 259 days. The announcement reached the Times in time for the morning edition, exactly as Dawson had arranged. Britain woke on January 21st to learn that their king had passed peacefully at Sandringham, surrounded by his family, attended by his physician. The bulletin's phrase, "moving peacefully towards its close," became the official story. It would remain the official story for 50 years. No one asked what happened between the bulletin and the death. No one questioned why the timing had been so convenient for the morning papers. No one inquired about Dawson's actions in that bedroom. Queen Mary, present throughout, maintained her composure. The extent of her knowledge remains one of the story's unresolved questions. Some accounts suggest Dawson consulted the Queen and the Prince of Wales, who instructed him not to prolong the king's life unnecessarily, though whether this amounted to consent for active intervention is disputed among historians. The Archbishop of Canterbury prayed. The Prince of Wales became King Edward VIII. The household at Sandringham began the rituals of royal mourning. George V was buried with full honours at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. The funeral was magnificent. The grief was genuine. The narrative was seamless. Dawson went back to his practice. He remained one of the most respected physicians in Britain, a baron, a member of the House of Lords, and an establishment figure whose reputation was beyond question. Nothing changed, nothing was questioned. And then, less than 11 months after killing the king, Dawson did something that would become, once the notebook surfaced, the single most astonishing detail in the entire story. In December 1936, the House of Lords debated the voluntary euthanasia legalization bill, a proposal to give physicians the legal right to end the lives of terminally ill patients under controlled conditions. Lord Dawson of Penn rose and spoke against it. He helped defeat the bill, but not because he opposed the practice. He described euthanasia as a mission of mercy and argued that such decisions should remain in the hands of individual physicians, not regulated by law. The doctor who had secretly killed the king stood in Parliament and argued that other doctors should be trusted to do the same thing he had done, just without legal scrutiny, without transparency, and without anyone writing it into statute. The man who had ended a king's life in private wanted the freedom to do so to remain private. That same December brought another convulsion. Edward VIII, the new king, abdicated on December 11, 1936, after a reign of approximately 326 days. His determination to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, created a constitutional crisis that consumed the monarchy, the government, and the press for months. George V had reportedly feared this outcome. One widely circulated remark, though its precise wording varies across sources and some historians question whether it was ever actually spoken, has the old king warning, "After I am dead, the boy will ruin himself within 12 months. Whether or not the exact words were his, the prediction was nearly precise. The son took the throne the night the doctor killed the father. Within a year, the son gave it up. The monarchy that George V had spent a quarter century stabilizing was destabilized before his grave had fully settled. Prince Albert, the second son, quiet, overshadowed, burdened by a severe stammer, became King George VI. He too had never expected the crown. The pattern repeated itself with eerie precision. A second son inheriting a throne because the intended heir had been removed. George VI would lead Britain through the Second World War. His daughter Elizabeth would reign for 70 years, and the weight of subsequent history would bury the circumstances of George V's death beneath layers of new crises, new triumphs, and new royal mythology that made January 20, 1936 feel like ancient settled history. Lord Dawson died on March 7, 1945, at the age of 80. He was honoured in obituaries as a distinguished physician and public servant. His private papers, including the notebook, passed to those who managed his estate. No one examined them with particular attention. No one thought to look for a confession. The official story of George V's peaceful death held without challenge. The bulletin's elegant phrase was taught in medical schools as a model of compassionate physician communication. No one told the students about the syringe. 41 years after Dawson's death, 50 years after the King's, Dawson's biographer, Francis Watson, published the notebook's contents in the December 1986 issue of History Today. Watson had discovered the diary decades earlier while writing his 1950 biography of Dawson, but had withheld the revelation at Lady Dawson's request. Now, with every participant long dead, he set the record straight. The reaction was immediate. For the first time, the British public learned what had happened inside that bedroom at Sandringham. The calculated bulletin, the telephone call to the Times, the lethal injection into the jugular vein, the death timed for a newspaper's morning printing schedule. Watson reproduced Dawson's own words. There was no ambiguity. The doctor had written it all down with a clinician's detachment. The dosage, the method, the reasoning, the coordination. He had killed the king and recorded the act as calmly as a prescription. No legal action followed. No official inquiry was opened. No criminal investigation was initiated. The royal family issued no public statement, not then, not in the years since. By 1986, every person present in that bedroom was dead. There was no defendant to prosecute, no witness to examine, no living party with legal standing to pursue the matter. The revelation entered the historical record and the bioethics literature as one of the most extraordinary cases in the modern euthanasia debate. But the debate itself could never resolve the central strangeness. This was not a straightforward case of mercy. The king was dying, yes, but the injections likely shortened his life by hours, not days. The act was concealed. It was unilateral. It was performed partly for the purpose of coordinating with a newspaper deadline. And it was carried out by a doctor who, within months, publicly argued that the practice he had performed in secret should remain unregulated, trusted to doctors' discretion rather than defined by law. The mercy framework does not hold. The murder framework feels too simple. The act sits in the space between exactly where the monarchy has always operated. Sandringham House still stands. The royal family still gathers there each Christmas, walking through rooms that sit alongside the bedroom where Dawson pushed a needle into the king's neck. St. George's Chapel at Windsor still holds George V's remains beneath the floor. No plaque, no inscription, no marker of any kind acknowledges the circumstances. Visitors to the castle pass within feet of the grave without knowing that the man beneath the stone did not die on his body's schedule. He died on the newspapers. The peaceful bulletin is still quoted. The phrase is still admired. Medical students still encounter it as an example of humane communication. They are almost never told the context, that the words were written 90 minutes before a lethal injection, that the piece they described was manufactured, that the dignity they projected was a performance staged for a printing press. George V spent 25 years proving that a monarchy could survive the age of revolution. He changed his family's name. He sacrificed his cousin. He endured a world war, an empire's slow contraction, a general strike, a near-fatal illness, and the collapse of every related throne in Europe. He used the radio to make the crown sound human. He stood on balconies to let the public believe the institution was permanent. He built the most carefully managed royal image in modern British history. And when the image required a final scene, a peaceful death, a dignified passing, a headline timed for the morning edition, the man he trusted most delivered exactly that. The notebook is still there. A small private record in a physician's handwriting describing how he killed the King of England and telephoned the newspaper. It survived because the killer wrote it down. It surfaced because Dawson's own biographer, decades later, chose to publish what he had found. It was never answered. Not by law, not by the palace, not by the medical profession, because the institution it served had already moved forward, as institutions do. The official version of George V's death lasted 50 years. The truth fit inside a notebook. And that notebook outlasted everything: the reign, the doctor, the cover story, the empire, and the morning edition that made it all worthwhile.